The wind howled like a wounded animal through the canyon, carrying with it sheets of snow that turned the world white and blind. Calder Briggs had seen plenty of storms in his 30-odd years, but this one had teeth. He sat by his fireplace, watching the flames dance while outside his cabin groaned under the assault of winter's fury. The knock came soft at first, so soft he thought it might be a branch hitting the door, but then it came again, more insistent, though barely stronger than a whisper against wood. Calder set down his coffee cup and listened. No one came out this far, especially not in weather like this. His cabin sat a good 5 miles from the nearest neighbor, tucked into a fold of the mountains where even the deer had sense enough to avoid during storms. The third knock was followed by something else, a voice, barely audible over the wind. A woman's voice. Calder rose from his chair, his movements deliberate and cautious. Living alone had taught him to be wary of unexpected visitors. He reached for the rifle mounted above the fireplace, but stopped himself. What kind of threat knocked so gentle? When he opened the door, the sight that greeted him made him step back in surprise. A woman stood on his threshold, or rather, swayed there, looking like she might collapse at any moment. Her hair, dark as wet cedar bark, hung in wild tangles around her face. Snow clung to her threadbare dress, if you could still call the torn and mud-stained fabric a dress. But it was her feet that made Calder stare. Bare feet, red and swollen with cold, standing in the snow like she'd walked clear across the territory without shoes. "I just need shelter until it passes," she said, her voice hoarse. "I won't take anything from you." Her eyes met his, green as spring grass, but holding something wild and desperate in them. Not the desperation of a criminal or a confidence trickster, but of someone who'd been running from something worse than the storm. Calder knew he should say no. A man living alone didn't invite trouble into his home, and a barefoot woman appearing in a blizzard was nothing if not trouble. But those feet in the snow, the way she trembled but kept her chin up, the pride fighting with necessity in her eyes, something in him couldn't form the word. Instead, he stepped aside. She stumbled past him, and he caught her elbow when her knees buckled. Her skin burned with cold through the thin fabric. Up close, he could see the bruises on her arms, fading to yellow and green. Old bruises, the kind that told their own story without words. "Sit," he said, guiding her to the chair he just vacated by the fire. "You're half frozen." She sank into the chair like her strings had been cut, but her back stayed straight. Her hands folded carefully in her lap, even as they shook. Calder grabbed a blanket from his bed in the corner. His cabin was just one room, everything visible from everywhere else, and draped it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. He busied himself stoking the fire higher, adding another log. The flames crackled and sparked, filling the silence between them. Outside, the storm raged on, making the cabin walls shudder. But inside, the only sound was the fire and her gradually slowing breaths. Calder poured coffee from the pot he always kept warm on the hearth, adding a splash of whiskey from the bottle on his shelf. He handed it to her without a word. Her hands shook as she took it, but she managed to drink without spilling. "Name's Susanna," she offered after a few sips. "Susanna Lee." He nodded, but didn't offer his own name yet. Instead, he pulled his other chair, the only other chair closer to the fire, and sat. From here, he could see her better. Despite the dirt and exhaustion, she was beautiful in the way wild things were beautiful. Not delicate or pampered, but strong beneath the wear. Her cheekbones stood out sharp, her jaw set with determination even in her depleted state. But it was those feet that kept drawing his attention. The soles were torn and bleeding, leaving faint red marks on his floor. How far had she walked? And from what? "I'll get you something for those," he said, gesturing to her feet. "I'm fine," she said quickly, tucking them under the blanket. "No, you're not." He rose and went to his supplies, pulling out clean cloth and a tin of salve he used on his horses when they got cut up. When he knelt in front of her chair, she tensed. "I can do it myself," she said. "You can barely hold that cup steady." His voice came out gruffer than he intended. He gentled it. "Let me help." She studied his face for a long moment, then slowly extended one foot from under the blanket. Calder had doctored plenty of injuries on the ranch, but something about taking that small, damaged foot in his hands made him handle it like spun glass. The cuts were deep, full of dirt and small stones. She flinched when he started cleaning them, but made no sound. "How far did you walk?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "I don't know. Since yesterday morning. Maybe in this weather." The storm came up sudden. He didn't ask why she hadn't stopped somewhere closer, why she'd kept walking even as the snow began. Some questions didn't need asking when the answers were written in bruises and desperation. He worked in silence, cleaning and salving both feet, then wrapping them in clean cloth. She watched him the whole time, those green eyes studying his face like she was trying to read his intentions in the lines around his eyes, the set of his mouth. "Calder," he said finally, sitting back on his heels. "Calder Briggs." "Thank you, Mr. Briggs." "Just Calder." He stood, his knees protesting the position. "You hungry?" She hesitated, pride warring with need again. "I don't want to take—" "I've got stew. Made too much anyway." It was a lie. He'd made just enough for himself, as always. But he ladled out a generous portion into a bowl and handed it to her. She ate slowly at first, trying to maintain some dignity, but hunger won out. She finished the bowl, and he filled it again without asking. While she ate, he busied himself around the cabin, trying not to watch her too obviously. He hung her wet shawl. He hadn't noticed she'd had one by the fire to dry. Found an old shirt of his and a pair of woolen socks, setting them on the table where she could see them. "You can change when you're ready," he said. "I'll step outside." "In this storm?" "Just to the barn. Need to check on the horses anyway." She set down the empty bowl. "Why are you being so kind?" The question caught him off guard. He stood by the door, his hand on the latch, and considered his answer. Why was he? He'd turned away travelers before, directed them to town when they came looking for help. But something about this woman, maybe the way she'd asked for shelter instead of demanding it, maybe those bare feet in the snow, maybe just the storm itself making him soft. "Storm's no time to be unkind," he said finally. He pulled on his coat and hat, then stepped out into the blizzard. The cold hit him like a fist, driving the breath from his lungs. He fought his way to the barn, more to give her privacy than from any real need to check the animals. His 2 horses stood placidly in their stalls, plenty of hay and water to see them through. Calder leaned against the barn wall, letting the cold clear his head. What had he done? Letting a strange woman into his home. He'd built this life carefully, chose this isolation deliberately after. Now here came this wild-haired woman with her mysterious past and her bare feet, disturbing the quiet order he'd made of his life. But even as he thought it, he knew he couldn't have turned her away. Not in this storm, not with those feet. When enough time had passed, he fought his way back to the cabin. She'd changed into his shirt, which hung on her like a tent, and pulled on the wool socks. Her dress lay drying by the fire next to the shawl. She'd tried to clean up the bloody footprints she'd left on his floor. "You didn't need to do that," he said, shaking snow from his coat. "I've left enough of a mess already." She sat curled in the chair again, looking smaller in his clothes, but somehow more present, more real. The firelight played across her face, highlighting the sharp angle of her cheekbone, the determined set of her jaw even in rest. "You can have the bed," Calder said. "I'll take the floor." "I couldn't." "You could and you will. You're half dead on your feet. Won't do either of us any good if you catch your death after I went to the trouble of patching you up." A small smile tugged at her mouth, the first he'd seen. It transformed her face, hinting at who she might be when not running from something in a blizzard. Practical man. She said, "That's me." He pulled out his bedroll and laid it near the fire while she limped to the bed. She moved carefully, obviously in pain despite the salve and bandages. When she settled under his quilts, she let out a small sigh that might have been relief or exhaustion or both. "Calder," her voice came soft from the darkness of the corner. "Yeah, I meant what I said. I won't take anything from you. When the storm passes, I'll be gone." He stared at the fire, watching the flames dance. "We'll see what the morning brings." The wind howled louder, as if in response, and the cabin creaked and groaned around them. But inside, it was warm and safe, and for now, that was enough. Calder pulled his blanket up to his chin and closed his eyes. But sleep was a long time coming. He listened to her breathing slowly even out, deepening into sleep, and wondered what tomorrow would bring when the storm finally passed. But another part of him, a part he thought had gone quiet forever, wondered if he wanted her to keep that promise to leave. The cabin had felt plenty big enough for one man and his ghosts. But tonight, with her presence filling the shadows, it didn't feel quite so empty. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and outside the storm raged on, sealing them in together against the wild, white world. Calder woke before dawn, as was his habit. The storm had quieted some, though snow still fell steady outside the windows. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a weak orange glow across the cabin floor. He moved quietly, practiced in the art of not disturbing, though it had been years since there'd been anyone to disturb. She was still asleep, curled small beneath his quilts. In the dim light, he could see her face had lost some of its desperate tension. Sleep had smoothed the worried lines from her forehead, made her look younger. He wondered how old she was, maybe 25, maybe younger. Hard living could age a person beyond their years. He built the fire back up, moving slow and deliberate to keep the noise down. But when he set the coffee pot on its hook over the flames, she stirred. "I'm sorry," she said, sitting up quick. "I overslept. I should—" "Sun's not even up yet." He kept his back to her, giving her a moment to orient herself. "No rush." He heard the bed creak as she stood, heard her sharp intake of breath when her feet hit the floor. The cuts would be stiff and sore this morning. "Stay put," he said without turning. "I'll bring you coffee." "I'm not an invalid." "No, but you're hurt. No sense making it worse for pride's sake." She was quiet a moment. Then the bed creaked again as she sat back down. Calder allowed himself a small smile. Practical woman, underneath the pride. When the coffee was ready, he poured 2 cups and turned to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, his quilt wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair had dried in the night, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She'd tried to tame it with her fingers, but it still had a wild look to it. He handed her a cup and sat in his chair by the fire. They drank in silence, the only sounds the pop of the fire and the wind outside. It should have been awkward, sharing his small space with a stranger, but something about her presence felt not comfortable exactly, but not wrong either. Like when you put a new piece of furniture in a room and it takes time to get used to it being there. "How long have you lived here?" she asked finally. 7 years. Alone. He nodded. "Gets lonely, I imagine. Gets peaceful." She studied him over her cup. There's a difference between peaceful and lonely. Sometimes they wear the same face. He didn't have an answer for that, so he didn't try. Instead, he stood and went to his food stores. "Breakfast." "I should go. I've imposed enough." "Storm's not done yet, and you can barely walk. Where exactly do you plan on going?" She set her jaw in that stubborn way he was already recognizing. "I'll manage." "I'm sure you will, but not today." He pulled out bacon and biscuit making. "Today you'll eat breakfast and let those feet heal some. Tomorrow we can argue about it again if you want." She watched him work, her fingers wrapped tight around the warm cup. Why are you doing this? You asked that yesterday. You didn't really answer. Calder laid strips of bacon in his cast-iron pan, the sizzle filling the cabin with savory smoke. Why was he doing this? He'd built this life to avoid complications, connections. But here he was, cooking breakfast for a barefoot woman who'd walked out of a storm. Maybe I'm tired of cooking for one, he said finally. That's not an answer either. It's the only one I've got. She fell quiet again, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. While the bacon cooked, he mixed up biscuits. Working the dough with practiced hands, she shifted on the bed, wincing. There's salve on the table, he said without looking up. Might as well tend those feet while you're sitting. He heard her move, carefully making her way to the table, the rustle of cloth as she unwrapped the bandages. He kept his eyes on his work, giving her privacy for the task. These are healing faster than they should, she said, surprise in her voice. Good salve. Use it on the horses when they get cut up. Horse medicine. He glanced over to find her almost smiling. Works on people too. We're all just animals when it comes down to it. She spread the salve careful on her cuts, then rewrapped them with fresh cloth he'd left on the table. Her movements were efficient, practiced. She'd tended wounds before. Breakfast was simple but filling: bacon, biscuits, and coffee. They ate at his small table, her in his chair, him on an upturned crate he used for extra seating when he had it, which was never. These are good, she said, breaking a biscuit in half. Not much else to do out here but practice cooking. Do you ranch? Some few head of cattle, horses, enough to get by. And that's enough getting by? He looked at her across the table. Has been so far. She dropped her eyes to her plate. I suppose getting by is better than some alternatives. There was weight in those words, stories untold. But Calder didn't push. Everyone had a right to their secrets. After breakfast, she insisted on helping clean up, limping between the table and the wash bucket he kept by the door. He watched her from the corner of his eye, noting how she favored her left foot more than the right, how she gripped the table edge when she thought he wasn't looking. You need to rest those feet, he said. I need to feel useful. He understood that, the need to contribute, to not be beholden. Fair enough, but when they start paining too much, you sit, deal. She nodded, and they worked together in companionable silence. The storm had picked up again, wind rattling the windows in their frames, snow piled against the glass, cutting them off from the world outside. When the dishes were done, she stood uncertain in the middle of the cabin, like she didn't know what to do with herself. Calder had never been one for idle hands either. He went to a trunk in the corner and pulled out a shirt that needed mending. Can you sew? Her face brightened. Yes. He handed her the shirt and his sewing kit. Been meaning to fix that tear for weeks. It was a small thing, but she took to it like he'd given her a gift. She settled in the chair by the fire, spreading the shirt across her lap, examining the tear with focused attention. Her fingers moved quick and sure with the needle. Calder busied himself with inside chores, oiling tack, sharpening knives, the dozen small tasks that always needed doing. But he found his attention drifting to her, watching the way the firelight caught in her hair, the careful precision of her stitches. You're good at that, he said. Had plenty of practice. Her voice carried something bitter. Some men are hard on clothes. Again, that weight of untold story. Calder turned back to his knife, running the stone along the blade in smooth strokes. Some men were hard on more than clothes. He thought but didn't say. The morning passed quiet like that, each working at their tasks, the storm holding them in its white embrace. Around noon, Calder made more coffee and they took a break, sitting by the fire. You don't talk much, she observed. Never saw much point in filling the air with words. Most people can't stand silence. They have to stuff it full of chatter. You don't chatter. No. She stared into the fire. I learned the value of silence. There was hurt in those words, too. Calder wondered what had taught her that lesson. But again, he didn't ask. Some things were better learned in time, if at all. The afternoon wore on, the storm showing no signs of breaking. Susanna finished mending his shirt and moved on to other pieces that needed attention. Calder found excuses to stay inside. Normally, he'd brave any weather to tend his animals, but today the barn could wait. As evening approached, he made dinner a simple stew with vegetables from his root cellar and salt pork. She helped, learning where he kept things, moving around his small space with growing confidence despite her injured feet. "You're favoring that left foot more," he said as she reached for bowls. "It's fine. Sit, I'll get 'em." For once, she didn't argue. Sinking into the chair with poorly hidden relief, Calder served the stew, noting how she waited for him to start eating before she did. Manners that spoke of better times, maybe, or at least different ones. "This storm could last days," he said. "Sometimes they do, this time of year." She looked toward the window, where snow continued to fall heavy. "I can't stay days." "Where do you need to be?" "Away." The word came out sharp, final. "Away's not a place." "It is for me." Calder let it drop. He'd known that feeling, the need to be anywhere but where you were. It's what had driven him to this cabin, this isolation. Running from something. Running to nothing, just running. After dinner, she insisted on helping clean again, though he could see the pain in her movements was worse. When the last dish was dried, she nearly collapsed into the chair. "Let me look at those feet," he said. "They're fine." "Susanna?" It was the first time he'd used her name, and something flickered in her eyes. "Please." She extended her feet reluctantly. He knelt and unwrapped the bandages gentle as he could. The left foot was worse, as he'd suspected, one cut looking angry and red. "This needs cleaning again," he said. "Maybe something more than salve." He fetched his whiskey bottle and clean cloth. "This'll sting." "I've had worse." He believed her. Still, he was careful as he could be, cleaning the wounds with whiskey-soaked cloth. She gripped the chair arms but made no sound. "There," he said, applying fresh salve and bandages. "Should be better by morning." "Thank you." Her voice was soft. "For all of it, I know I'm a burden." "You're not." The words came out more forceful than he intended. He gentled his tone. "You're just someone who needed help. Nothing wrong with that." She looked at him long then, those green eyes searching his face. "Most people would say there's everything wrong with it, especially a woman alone, showing up like I did." "I'm not most people." "No," she agreed. "You're not." The fire crackled between them, filling the space where words might have gone. Outside, the wind howled its lonely song, but inside the cabin felt warm and close and strange with her presence. "The bed's yours again tonight," he said, standing. "Calder." "Not arguing about it." She smiled then, small but real. "Stubborn man. Pot calling the kettle black." That surprised a small laugh from her, quickly stifled like she'd forgotten how, but Calder had heard it. That glimpse of who she might be when she wasn't running, wasn't hurt, wasn't scared. As they settled for the night, her in his bed, him on the floor, Calder found himself hoping the storm might last just a little longer, just until her feet healed, just until that haunted look left her eyes, just until he remembered what it felt like to not be alone. The wind sang its agreement, and snow continued to fall, sealing them together in their small world of firelight and careful kindness. The third morning dawned clear, the storm finally spent. Sunlight streamed through the frost-covered windows, turning the cabin's interior golden and strange after days of gray light. Calder woke to find Susanna already up, standing at the window in his borrowed shirt, staring out at the transformed world. "It's beautiful," she said without turning. "Like the earth got wiped clean." He rose from his bedroll, joints stiff from another night on the floor. Snow's good at hiding things. Doesn't mean they're gone, just covered over for a while. She glanced at him then, something knowing in her expression, speaking from experience. Instead of answering, he busied himself with the morning ritual of coffee. The pot had become their shared anchor, the brewing and pouring a comfortable routine established over just 2 mornings, but feeling older, deeper. She moved better today, he noticed, still limping, but the desperate edge of pain had faded from her movements. The salve was doing its work, along with rest and regular meals. Her face had lost some of its hollow look, too. "I should go today," she said, accepting her cup. "The storm's passed." "Where?" "West, maybe California. Heard there's opportunities there for women willing to work." "That's a long way on foot." "I'll manage." That phrase again, her answer to everything. Calder sipped his coffee, thinking. The nearest town was 15 miles east, opposite direction from where she wanted to go, but it had a stage that ran west twice a week. "You always ask if I need something from town," she asked suddenly. "Am I keeping you from business?" "Nothing that can't wait. But you do need to go eventually." He studied her over his cup. She was working up to something. He could tell. "Eventually. I could pay you back. For your kindness. I can clean, sew, cook some, work off what I owe before I leave." "You don't owe me anything." "I owe you 3 days of food and shelter, doctoring, the clothes on my back." Her chin lifted. "I pay my debts." He recognized that pride, that need to balance the ledger. It was the kind of pride that kept a person whole when everything else was trying to break them apart. "All right," he said. "You can help out until your feet are proper healed. Then we'll call it square." Relief flickered across her face, quickly hidden. They ate breakfast in their established pattern, her cooking while he tended the fire, working around each other in the small space like they'd been doing it longer than 3 days. After breakfast, Calder announced he needed to go to the barn. "Animals have been patient, but they need proper tending now." "I'll come help." "Your feet are well enough for a walk to the barn." She was already reaching for her dried dress, still stained and torn but wearable. "I'm good with animals." He waited outside while she changed, then watched as she carefully pulled on the oversized boots he'd found for her. They were his old pair, too big even with thick socks, but better than bare feet in snow. The path to the barn was knee-deep with fresh powder. Calder went first, breaking trail, and she followed in his footsteps. The sun was brilliant on the white world, making them both squint. The air was sharp and clean, so cold it hurt to breathe. Inside the barn, his 2 horses nickered greeting. They were sturdy animals, nothing fancy, a bay gelding named Buck and a spotted mare called Sadie. Both came to their stall doors, eager for attention after days of neglect. "Oh, aren't you beauties?" Susanna breathed, immediately moving to Sadie. The mare nosed at her gentle, and Susanna stroked her neck with practiced ease. "You know horses," Calder observed. "Grew up with them? My father—" She stopped, her hand stilling on Sadie's neck. "Yes, I know horses." He didn't push for more, just handed her a brush. They worked in companionable silence, mucking stalls and grooming. She was good with the animals, confident and gentle. Sadie especially took to her, following her movements with pricked ears. "She likes you," Calder said. "Mares understand things." Susanna gave Sadie a final pat. "Don't you, girl? You know what it's like to have to be strong." The words weren't really for him, so he didn't respond. But he filed them away with all the other small pieces of her story she'd let slip. They spent the morning in the barn. Then Calder showed her around his small operation, a few head of cattle in the near pasture, chickens in a coop attached to the barn, a root cellar built into the hillside. It wasn't much, but it was his. "You've built something good here," she said, standing beside him looking out over his land. "Something solid." "Took time." "Most solid things do." Back in the cabin, She set about cleaning with a vengeance, as if she could work off her debt in one day. Calder tried to tell her to take it easy, but she wouldn't hear it. By evening, his already tidy cabin nearly sparkled. "You're going to scrub a hole clean through that table," he said, watching her attack a perfectly clean surface. She paused, brush in hand, looking almost sheepish. "I like being useful." "You've been useful. Now sit before you undo all that healing." She sat, but he could see the restlessness in her, the need to be doing. He understood. Idle hands left too much room for thinking, for remembering. After supper, she'd insisted on cooking. Producing better biscuits than he'd ever managed, they sat by the fire. The silence between them had grown comfortable over the days, but tonight it felt different, charged somehow. "That place you're running from," he said carefully. "It likely to follow you." Her hands stilled on the mending she'd taken up. "No, not anymore." The finality in her voice told him more than details would have. Whoever she was running from wasn't coming after her, because they couldn't, or wouldn't either way. It was done. "Good," was all he said. She looked at him sideways. "You don't ask many questions." "Figured if you wanted me to know something, you'd tell me. Most people can't stand not knowing. They dig and pry. I'm not most people." "No," she agreed softly. "You're not." They lapsed back into silence, but she seemed to come to some decision. "I was married," she said suddenly. 5 years. He took me west to the goldfields. Sure, he'd strike it rich. When he didn't," she shrugged. "Some men handle disappointment poorly." Calder kept his eyes on the fire, letting her talk or not as she chose. "He found other ways to make money. Playing cards. Mostly, wasn't good at that either. Started drinking more. She touched her arm where he'd seen those fading bruises. "Well, you can imagine." "Where is he now?" "Gone. Took up with a saloon girl who had better prospects. Left me with nothing but bruises and bad memories." "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "Don't be. Him leaving was the kindest thing he ever did for me. I just wish he'd done it sooner." They sat with that truth between them. Calder thought of his own past. The reason he'd sought this isolation? Different story. Same ending. Sometimes the best thing people could do was leave you alone. "So you decided to walk to California," he said. "Seemed as good a direction as any." She managed a wry smile. "Though I hadn't counted on losing my boots to that creek crossing. Or the storm. Lucky you found my cabin." "Lucky." She tested the word out like she wasn't sure it fit. Yes, I suppose it was. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the night was clear and cold. Stars visible through the window like scattered ice. "What about you?" she asked. "What sent you out here alone?" He'd known the question would come eventually. Fair was fair she'd shared her pain. Least he could do was hint at his own. "Had a wife once. Mary." The name felt rusty in his mouth. "Fever took her 7 years back, along with—" He stopped. Some wounds didn't need exposing, even in trade. "Anyway, after, I couldn't stay where we'd been. Too many memories. Came out here to start over." "I'm sorry. Long time ago now." Time doesn't always heal like they say it does. Sometimes it just scars over. He looked at her then, this woman who'd walked out of a storm into his carefully controlled life. Sometimes scars are stronger than what came before. She held his gaze, something shifting between them. Understanding. Maybe recognition of shared hurt. Different in detail, but similar in shape. "I should tend your feet," he said, needing to break the moment before it became something else. "They're much better. Still." She didn't argue, extending her feet for his inspection. The cuts were healing clean, pink new skin forming. A few more days and she'd be able to walk without pain. A few more days and she'd leave. The thought sat heavier than it should. As he rewrapped her feet, she asked, "You going to town tomorrow?" "Thinking about it. Need supplies if this weather keeps up. Would you mind if I came? I could help carry things. And I should see about the stage schedule. For when I'm healed. If you're up for it. I will be. He finished with her feet and sat back. She didn't immediately tuck them away. And for a moment, they just sat there, her small feet in his hands, the fire warming them both. Thank you, she said quietly, for not asking for more than I could give. He gently released her feet and stood. Everyone's got a right to their own story, to tell it or not as they choose. She smiled then, soft and real. That's a rare kindness, Calder Briggs. Just common decency. Like I said, rare. As they settled for sleep, still in their separate spaces, but somehow closer than before, Calder found himself dreading tomorrow's trip to town. Not the going, but what it meant. Stage schedules and westward plans and the end of this strange, peaceful interlude. But that was tomorrow's worry. Tonight, she was here, safe and healing, and the cabin didn't feel empty at all. The wagon ride to town took 3 hours over roads still thick with snow. Calder had hitched up Buck to pull while Sadie followed behind, tied to the wagon bed. Susanna sat beside him on the bench, wrapped in an old coat he'd found that had belonged to before. It swamped her small frame, but she'd accepted it without question. She still wore his old boots, stuffed with extra socks to make them fit better. Her dress, cleaned and mended as best as could be managed, showed its hard use despite her efforts. He'd offered to buy her new clothes in town, but her pride had flared hot at that suggestion. I'll work for what I need, she'd said firmly. Now, as the wagon rolled slowly through the white landscape, she sat quiet beside him, watching the country unfold. The mountains rose sharp and clean against the blue sky. Pine forests dark against the snow. A hawk circled overhead, hunting. It's beautiful country, she said, as its moments. You ever get tired of the quiet? He glanced at her. You asking for yourself or for me? A small smile tugged at her mouth. Maybe both. Quiet's never bothered me. It's noise that sets me on edge. I used to hate the quiet, she admitted. Meant I was alone with my thoughts. But lately, she pulled the coat tighter around herself. Lately, I found some peace in it. The town of Garrison appeared ahead. A collection of wooden buildings huddled along a main street. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from a distance they could see people moving about their business. After days of isolation in the cabin, it looked almost foreign. Bigger than I expected, Susanna said. Railroad came through 2 years back. Town's been growing since. As they rolled down Main Street, heads turned. Calder knew what they saw: the hermit rancher who came to town maybe once a month, and beside him a woman in ill-fitting clothes with eyes that had seen too much. He kept his gaze forward, but he could feel Susanna shrinking beside him, pulling the coat up higher. He stopped the wagon in front of Henderson's general store. The proprietor's wife, Mrs. Henderson, was sweeping the boardwalk. She paused, broom in hand, eyes sharp with curiosity as they climbed down. Mr. Briggs, she said, her gaze sliding to Susanna. Haven't seen you in a spell. Storm kept me in, Calder replied evenly. And who might this be, Mrs.? Henderson's tone was polite, but Calder could hear the questions underneath. Miss Lee, Susanna said before Calder could answer. Pleased to meet you, ma'am. Miss Lee, Mrs. Henderson repeated it like she was tasting the name. Are you new to Garrison? Just passing through. I see. Well, welcome all the same. But her eyes said different, taking in Susanna's worn dress, the oversized coat and boots, the way she stood just slightly behind Calder like she was using him as a shield. Inside the store, Calder went about his business, gathering flour, coffee, salt, other necessities. Susanna wandered the aisles, looking but not touching. He watched her pause at a display of fabric, her fingers hovering over a bolt of blue calico before pulling back. "Pretty color." "Mrs." Henderson said, appearing at Susanna's elbow. "Would make up into a nice dress." "Yes, ma'am." "Are you staying at the hotel? I didn't see you come in on the stage." Susanna's shoulders tensed. "I've been... Mr. Briggs was kind enough to offer shelter during the storm." "Oh, Mrs." Henderson's eyebrows climbed. "At his cabin, just the two of you." Calder stepped between them, setting his purchases on the counter. "Add these up. Would you..." "Mrs." Henderson retreated behind the counter, but her lips were pressed thin with disapproval. As she tallied his goods, she kept glancing at Susanna, who had moved to study a display of canned goods with intense focus. "That'll be $12.40. "Mrs." Henderson announced. Then, lower. "Calder, a word." He counted out his money, waiting. "That girl?" she whispered. "It ain't proper. Her staying with you. People will talk." "People always talk. But your reputation is my concern." He kept his voice level but firm. "The lady needed help. I provided it. Nothing improper about Christian charity." "Mrs." Henderson sniffed. "If you say so. But a young woman like that, traveling alone, well, it raises questions. Only if folks insist on asking them." He collected his purchases and turned to find Susanna by the door, her face carefully blank. She'd heard. Of course. The store wasn't that big. "Where's the stage office?" she asked quietly as they loaded the wagon. "Down the street, but..." He paused, then forged ahead. "You sure you're ready your feet? We'll heal just as well on the road as anywhere else." She wasn't looking at him, her gaze fixed on the street. They walked to the stage office in silence. The schedule was posted on the wall. Westbound stage ran Tuesdays and Fridays. Today was Wednesday. 2 days, she murmured. "Where you headed exactly?" "Sacramento, eventually. Far as my money will take me for now." "How much you got?" She flushed. "Enough." He doubted that, but didn't press. At the counter, she inquired about fares. The clerk, a thin man with suspicious eyes, looked her up and down. "Sacramento's $40, he said. "Can take you as far as Carson City for $20. Calder saw her shoulders drop slightly. "I see. Thank you." Outside, she stood on the boardwalk, staring west like she could will herself there. "It's a lot of money," Calder said carefully. "I'll manage." There was that phrase again, brittle as ice. "There's work to be had here in town. Might could save up." "You heard Mrs. Henderson. A woman traveling alone raises questions. What kind of work do you think they'd offer me?" He knew she was right. A woman with no references, no connections, worn clothes, and a mysterious past the respectable establishments wouldn't hire her. That left the less respectable ones. And they both knew it. "Come on," he said. "Got one more stop." The bathhouse was at the end of town, run by a Chinese family who kept to themselves and didn't ask questions. Calder paid for a bath and left Susanna there with coins for the attendant. "Take your time," he said. "I'll be at the saloon." She looked uncertain. "Calder." "Go on. Hot water will do you good." The saloon was quiet this time of day. Just a few old-timers nursing beers. Calder ordered whiskey and stood at the bar, thinking. 2 days until the stage. 2 days until she walked out of his life as sudden as she'd walked in. "Calder Briggs." A voice beside him, slightly slurred. Tom Garrett, who had a ranch north of town. "Heard you got yourself a woman." "Heard wrong." "Mrs. Henderson says different. Says you got some Barefoot gal staying at your place." Calder took a slow sip of whiskey. "Storm brought a traveler to my door, offered shelter. She'll be moving on." "Sure she will." Tom's laugh was ugly. "We all know how that goes. Woman shows up needing help. Next thing you know." Calder set his glass down hard. "Tom, Whatever you're about to say, don't. Something in his voice must have penetrated Tom's whiskey haze. The man stepped back, hands raised. No offense meant, just saying, a pretty woman can make a man forget himself. Only if he lets her. But as Calder walked back to the bathhouse, Tom's words gnawed at him. Not the ugly implications, but the truth underneath. Susanna had made him forget himself. Forget the walls he'd built, the distance he kept. Made him remember what it felt like to share space, share silence, share coffee in the morning. He found her waiting outside the bathhouse, hair damp and braided neat, face pink from hot water. The worn dress looked worse somehow against her clean skin, but she stood straighter, chin up. "Better?" he asked. "Much, thank you." They drove out of town in silence, both aware of the looks that followed them. Susanna sat rigid beside him, hands folded tight in her lap. "I'm sorry," she said once they'd cleared town. "I've brought trouble to you." "You've brought nothing but yourself." Sometimes that's trouble enough. He thought about arguing, but what was the point? In 2 days she'd be gone, and Garrison would find something else to gossip about. His reputation would survive. It had survived worse. But as they rolled home through the afternoon light, Susanna, quiet beside him, Calder found himself caring less about his reputation than about the fact that she'd soon be gone. The cabin would go back to being just his, peaceful and empty. He'd cook for one again, talk to no one but the horses. "That blue fabric," he said suddenly. "The calico. It would suit you." She turned to look at him, surprise flickering across her face. "It was pretty. Could make a traveling dress. Better than—" He gestured at her current attire. "I couldn't—" "Call it wages, for the work you've been doing." She was quiet so long he thought she'd refuse. Then, soft as snowfall. "That's kind of you." "Just practical. Can't have you freezing on the stage." But they both knew it wasn't just practical. It was something else. Something neither of them had words for yet. As the cabin came into view, smoke still trickling from the chimney, Calder wondered if 2 days would be enough time to find those words, or if it would be better not to try. The next morning, Calder found Susanna sitting at the table, his work shirt spread before her. She'd already mended 2 others and was starting on the 3rd, her needle flashing in the morning light. But there was something different about the way she worked, an almost fierce concentration, like she was stitching more than just cloth together. "You don't have to fix every piece of clothing I own," he said, pouring coffee. "I want to leave things better than I found them." She didn't look up from her work. When I go, the words sat heavy between them. Tomorrow was Friday. The stage would come through at noon. He set a cup beside her and noticed she'd been crying. Her eyes were dry now, but slightly swollen, and there was a telltale salt track on her cheek she'd missed wiping away. "Susanna, did you know your shirts are all different sizes?" She forced brightness into her voice. "This one's near about 2 inches longer in the sleeve than the others. You must have lost weight since you bought it." He recognized the deflection and allowed it. "Been a while since I paid attention to such things." "Well, I've let out the seams on the smaller ones and taken in this one. They should fit better now." Such a small thing, but it twisted something in his chest. Mary used to do that, notice the little ways he needed tending and just quietly fix them. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be cared for in those small ways. They worked through the morning in their established rhythm, but everything felt weighted with impending goodbye. She organized his few dishes, cleaned the already clean windows, arranged his meager bookshelf. He split wood he didn't need, checked fences that weren't broken, anything to keep his hands busy while his mind churned. At midday, she started on his jacket, the heavy work coat he wore to the barn. It had a tear in the lining he'd been ignoring for months. "This needs more than mending," she said. "The whole lining's worn through." "It's fine." "It's not. You'll freeze come deep winter." She studied the jacket with a critical eye. "I could reline it, but I'd need material." He almost said it didn't matter, she'd be gone tomorrow. What did she care if he froze? But something in her face stopped him. She needed this, needed to feel she was leaving him better off. "There's an old blanket in the trunk," he said. "Wool's still good. Just got moth holes." Her face lit up. That would work perfect. She spent the afternoon carefully taking apart the jacket, using the old lining as a pattern. Her hands were quick and sure, but he noticed how often she paused to touch the fabric, smooth it flat, as if memorizing the texture. "You're good at this," he said, watching her work. "My mother taught me. Said a woman should be able to make something from nothing." A sad smile crossed her face. Turned out to be a useful skill. "Where is she now, your mother?" "Died when I was 15. Consumption. Father followed 2 years later, broken heart. The doctor said, but I think it was more broken dreams. He never was the same after she went." "I'm sorry." She shrugged, but he could see the old grief in the gesture. "Long time ago now." "Doesn't make it hurt less." She looked up at him then. Needle paused mid-stitch. "No, it doesn't." They held each other's gaze a moment too long, until she dropped her eyes back to her work. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting golden squares on the floor. Outside, a Chinook wind had started, warming the air and melting the snow from the roof in steady drips. "Spring's coming early," Calder observed. "Good weather for traveling." "I suppose." She finished the jacket as evening fell, the new lining neat and warm. When he tried it on, it fit better than it ever had, the weight distributed even across his shoulders. "It's perfect," he said. "It'll keep you warm." Her voice was carefully neutral, but he heard what she didn't say: "When I'm not here to make sure you're taking care of yourself." Supper was quiet. She'd made biscuits again, and stew from the leftover meat and vegetables. They ate slowly, neither wanting to finish. When the dishes were done and the fire built up for the night, they sat in their chairs, the space between them feeling wider than ever. "I should pack," she said finally. "Pack what?" She flushed. "I suppose you're right. I don't have much to pack." "Susanna." He struggled for words. "You don't have to go. Not if you're not ready." "I'm ready." But her voice shook slightly. "You don't have money for the stage." "I'll figure something out. I always do." "And if you can't, what then? You'll walk to California." "If I have to." He stood abruptly, frustrated. "You're the stubbornest woman I ever met." "And you're the most infuriating man." She stood too, facing him across the small space. "Why do you care what happens to me? In 2 days you can go back to your quiet life, your empty cabin, your—" She stopped, breathing hard. "My what?" "Your safety," she said more quietly. "Your walls, your distance from everything that might hurt." The words hit like physical blows because they were true. He had built walls, sought distance, chosen safety over feeling, until she'd knocked on his door with her bare feet and desperate eyes, and made him remember what it felt like to be human again. "Maybe I'm tired of safe," he said. "Don't," her voice was sharp, "don't say things you don't mean just because I'm leaving tomorrow. It's not fair." "What's not fair is you're walking out that door with nowhere to go and no way to get there." "That's my problem, not yours." "Like hell it is." They stood there, breathing hard, the air between them electric with things unsaid. Then Susanna's shoulders dropped. "I can't stay. Calder, you know that. People already talk. If I stay longer, they'll say worse. You've been nothing but kind to me. I won't repay that by ruining your reputation." "I don't give a damn about my reputation." "You should. This is your home. These are your neighbors. You have to live here after I'm gone." After I'm gone. There it was again. The inevitable truth. She was always going to leave. That had been the arrangement from the start, shelter from the storm. Nothing more. But somewhere between that first night and now, something had shifted. The temporary had started to feel permanent. The stranger had become What? He didn't have words for what Susanna had become to him. "I have something for you," he said abruptly. He went to his trunk and pulled out a small leather pouch. "It's not much, but it'll get you to Sacramento. Maybe a little further." She stared at the pouch like it might bite her. "I can't take your money. It's wages for the work you've done. We agreed that paid for room and board. Then it's a loan. Pay me back when you're settled." Calder. "Please." The word came out rougher than he intended. "Just let me do this. Let me know you'll get where you're going safe." She took the pouch with shaking hands, and he saw tears gather in her eyes. "Why are you so good to me?" He wanted to tell her then, wanted to say that she'd brought light back into his dark cabin, warmth back into his cold life, that watching her work in his kitchen felt like coming home, that the thought of tomorrow's empty rooms made his chest tight with loss. Instead, he said, "It's what anyone would do." "No," she whispered. "It's not." She clutched the pouch to her chest and turned away, but not before he saw the tears spill over. I should get some sleep. Early start tomorrow." "Susanna." "Good night, Calder." She retreated to the bed, and he heard her trying to muffle her crying in the pillow. He stood by the fire, hands clenched, fighting the urge to go to her, to tell her she didn't have to leave, that they could find another way. But what way was there? She was right, staying would only lead to talk, to assumptions, to the kind of reputation that would follow her forever. She deserved better than that. Deserved a fresh start in California, a chance to build something new. He bedded down by the fire but didn't sleep. Instead, he listened to her breathing eventually even out, watched the fire burn low, and tried to imagine tomorrow night when he'd be alone again. It seemed impossible that less than a week ago he'd been content with solitude. Now the thought of it felt like facing winter without a coat survivable, but cold and comfortless. Dawn would come too soon, bringing Friday and the westbound stage and the end of this strange, sweet interlude. But for now, for these last few hours, she was here. That would have to be enough. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough. But sometimes in life, you didn't get enough. You got what you got, and you were grateful for it, and you let it go when the time came. Even when letting go felt like tearing off a piece of yourself and watching it disappear down the road. Friday morning arrived gray and subdued, clouds hanging low over the mountains. Calder woke to find Susanna already up, standing by the window with a cup of coffee, wearing her mended dress. She'd braided her hair neat and tight, and something about that careful grooming made his chest ache. She was already pulling away, becoming the traveler again instead of the woman who'd shared his small space. "Storm coming in," she said without turning. "Might delay the stage." He heard the hope in her voice, quickly suppressed. "Maybe." They moved through breakfast like actors in a play, each knowing their part but the words all wrong. She'd packed what little she had, the few coins he'd given her, wrapped careful in a handkerchief, her sparse belongings tied in a cloth bundle. She'd left his shirt folded on the bed, the socks beside it. "Keep them," he said roughly. "The socks, at least. Your feet." "They're healed enough." She touched the bundle. "I've taken too much already." "You've taken nothing but what was freely given." She turned away, busying herself with cleaning the already clean table. They had hours yet before the stage, but the morning felt like it was rushing past, time moving too quick when he wanted it to slow. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Calder opened it to find Mrs. Paulson, the widow who lived on the neighboring ranch. She carried a covered basket and wore her visiting face, the one that meant she'd come for gossip as much as charity. "Morning, Calder." Her sharp eyes went immediately to Susanna. "I heard you had a visitor. Thought I'd bring some of my preserves. Welcome her proper." "That's kind of you, Mrs. Paulson," Calder said, not moving from the doorway. "Aren't you going to invite me in? It's a long ride, and these old bones could use a rest by your fire." He couldn't refuse without being rude. He stepped aside, and Mrs. Paulson swept in, her gaze cataloging everything Susanna's bundle on the table, the neatly folded bedding by the fire, the careful distance between them. "I'm Mrs. Paulson, dear," she said to Susanna, "and you must be the young lady everyone's talking about." Susanna's chin lifted slightly. "Susanna Lee, ma'am. Pleased to meet you." "Miss Lee." Mrs. Paulson emphasized the Miss. "How fortunate that you found shelter during that awful storm. Though I must say, it was quite brave of Calder to take in a stranger. A woman alone can never be too careful about appearances." "Mr. Briggs has been a perfect gentleman," Susanna said quietly. "Oh, I'm sure Calder's a good man. His dear wife Mary always said so. Such a tragedy, losing her and the baby like that. We all thought he'd never recover, hiding out here all alone, but perhaps he's finally ready to move on." The words hung in the air like icicles, sharp and cold. Susanna had gone very still, her face carefully blank. Calder felt anger rise in his throat. "Mrs. Paulson." "Oh, but listen to me. Going on. You must be excited about your journey. Miss Lee, where did you say you were headed?" "West," Susanna said simply. "Family there?" "No, ma'am. Friends. A position waiting. I'll find work when I arrive." Mrs. Paulson's eyebrows climbed. "How adventurous. Though I must say, in my day, a respectable woman didn't travel alone without prospects. But times change, I suppose." "Yes," Susanna said, her voice steady despite the implied insult. "They do." "Well," Mrs. Paulson set her basket on the table with a pointed thud. "I do hope you'll be careful. Dear, the world can be unkind to women without protection, especially women who've already, well, best not to dwell on the past. I always say." Calder had heard enough. "Thank you for the preserves. Mrs. Paulson, I'm sure you need to get back before the weather turns." "Oh, I'm in no rush." "I insist. Wouldn't want you caught in the storm." He all but herded her to the door. She went reluctantly, pausing at the threshold. "Do think about what I said, Calder, about moving on. Though perhaps, well, there are proper ways to do things. The Methodist Church has a lovely widows group, several respectable ladies who'd be pleased to—" "Good day, Mrs. Paulson." He closed the door on her final words and turned to find Susanna standing by the window again, arms wrapped around herself. "The baby," she said softly. "You didn't mention a baby." "Didn't see the point." His voice came out harsh. "Like the lady said, best not to dwell on the past." "I'm sorry. That must have been—" "Don't—" He couldn't hear sympathy right now, not with her about to leave. "Just don't—" They stood in uncomfortable silence. Mrs. Paulson's visit having stripped away the fragile peace they'd built. The ugly implications lingered that Susanna was improper, that staying with him had ruined her, that she was unsuitable compared to the respectable Methodist widows. "She's not wrong," Susanna said finally. "About appearances, about what people think." "I told you I don't care what people think." "Maybe you should." She turned to face him. "Maybe you should find one of those respectable widows, someone who can give you a future. Not someone like me who only brings trouble." "You didn't bring trouble. You brought—" He stopped, frustrated by his inability to find the right words. "What?" she asked softly. "What did I bring?" "Life," he wanted to say. "You brought life back into this tomb I'd made. You brought mornings that meant something and evenings that weren't just about enduring until sleep. You brought the sound of humming while you worked and the sight of your hands making my world better in 1,000 small ways." "You brought yourself," he said instead. "That was enough." She made a sound that might have been a sob and turned away. "I should go. Wait in town for the stage. It's better—" "No." "Calder." "No." He crossed to her in 2 strides, catching her shoulders, turning her to face him. Not like this. Not with her poison in your ears. You're not improper. You're not unsuitable. You're... What? Tears stood in her eyes. What am I? You're the first good thing to walk through my door in 7 years. The words hung between them, too honest for the bright morning light. Her tears spilled over, and without thinking, he pulled her against him. She came willingly, her face pressing into his shirt, her hands clutching at the fabric like she was drowning. I don't want to go, she whispered against his chest. Then don't. You know I have to. I know nothing of the sort. She pulled back to look up at him, and he saw everything in her eyes, the want, the fear, the certainty that staying would ruin them both. If I stay, I'll be your scandal. The barefoot woman who showed up in a storm and never left, they'll make assumptions. Let them. You say that now, but when they stop buying your cattle, when they whisper every time you go to town, when the respectable people cross the street to avoid you, then I'll know who my real neighbors are. She shook her head. You don't know what it's like, to have people look at you and see only the worst, to be judged for things beyond your control. I won't do that to you. What if I said I wanted you to stay anyway? What if I said the scandal would be worth it? Then I'd say you were a good man who's been alone too long and is mistaking gratitude for something more. That what you think that I'm confused about what I feel. Aren't you? He looked down at her tear-stained face, at this woman who'd walked barefoot through a blizzard and somehow found her way not just to his door, but past all his defenses. Was he confused? Maybe. Everything about the last week had turned his ordered world sideways. But some things came clear even in confusion. No, he said simply, I'm not confused. She searched his face, and something in her expression crumbled. Don't do this! Don't make it harder! How could it be harder, you're leaving? After today, I'll likely never see you again. The cabin will go back to being empty, and I'll go back to being... He struggled for the word. Less. You were fine before I came. I was surviving. There's a difference. A gust of wind rattled the windows, and they both looked toward the sound. The storm was building, but it wouldn't be enough to stop the stage, not enough to buy them more time. I should make you something to eat, she said, for the journey. He let her pull away, watched her move around his kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged there. She wrapped biscuits in clean cloth, added dried meat and preserves from Mrs. Paulson's basket. At least something good had come from that visit. As she worked, he memorized her. The way she tucked that one stubborn strand of hair behind her ear, the careful way she moved, still favoring her left foot just slightly, the determined set of her shoulders that couldn't quite hide their tremble. Too soon. It was time. He hitched Buck to the wagon while she gathered her pitiful bundle. When he came back inside, she was standing in the middle of the cabin, looking around like she was memorizing it too. Ready? He asked. No. The honesty of it caught them both off guard. She tried to smile. But it's time anyway. They drove to town in silence, the gray clouds pressing down like a weight. The road that had seemed so long just days ago now felt far too short. Before he was ready, the buildings of Garrison appeared ahead. The stage was already there, driver checking the horses. A few other passengers milled about a drummer with his cases. An older couple, a hard-looking man with a gun on his hip. Susanna would be the only woman traveling alone. Calder pulled up near the stage office, but neither of them moved to get down. They sat side by side on the wagon bench, watching the bustle of departure preparations. You have the money safe? He asked. She patted the pocket where she'd put the pouch. Yes. And the food? Yes. If you need anything, I'll be fine. But her voice wavered. The stage driver called for passengers to board. Still they sat, neither willing to make the first move toward goodbye. Susanna. Thank you, she said quickly. For everything, for the shelter and the kindness, and for not asking questions I couldn't answer, for making me feel safe. I haven't felt safe in a long time. You could feel safe longer if you stayed. She turned to look at him then, and her smile was the saddest thing he'd ever seen. That's the problem. I could stay and be safe and maybe even happy, but at what cost to you? I told you. I know what you told me, but I also know what's right, and staying isn't right, no matter how much we might wish it was. The driver called again, impatient now. Susanna gathered her bundle and climbed down from the wagon before he could help her. He followed, watching helplessly as she bought her ticket and turned back to him one last time. "Take care of yourself, Calder Briggs," she said softly. "Eat regular. Keep that jacket mended. Don't let the loneliness win." He wanted to say something, anything, to make her stay, but the words wouldn't come. And then she was climbing into the stage, finding a seat by the window. Their eyes met through the glass, and he saw his own pain reflected there. The driver cracked his whip, and the stage lurched into motion. Calder stood frozen, watching it carry her away, feeling like it was taking some essential part of him with it. She didn't look back, and he was grateful. If she had, he might have done something foolish like chase after the stage. Instead, he stood in the street until the stage disappeared around the bend, taking with it the woman who'd walked barefoot into his life and shown him what he'd been missing. The first drops of rain began to fall as he climbed back onto his wagon. By the time he reached the cabin, it was pouring, the kind of cold, steady rain that would last for days. He stood in his empty cabin, looking at the chair where she'd sat mending his clothes, the table where she'd prepared meals, the bed where she'd slept while he lay wakeful by the fire. Everything looked exactly as it had a week ago, but nothing felt the same. The silence, which had once been his comfort, now pressed against his ears like thunder. The solitude, which had once been his choice, now felt like a sentence. He'd told her she was the first good thing to walk through his door in 7 years. What he hadn't said was that he feared she might be the last. The days passed like cold molasses, each one identical to the last. Calder fell back into his old routines: morning coffee, tending the animals, mending what needed mending, eating simple meals in silence. But now the silence had texture, had weight. It pressed against him, filled with the absence of humming while she worked, of careful footsteps favoring a healing wound, of another person breathing in the darkness. 3 weeks after she left, he found himself standing in the mercantile, staring at that bolt of blue calico. "Mrs." Henderson watched him from behind the counter, lips pursed in disapproval. "That fabric's not going anywhere. Calder," she said. "Been looking at it every time you come in." He turned away without buying anything, leaving her tutting behind him. Outside, Garrison bustled with its usual business. The stage came through, disgorging new passengers, but he didn't look to see who they were. What was the point? She wasn't coming back. That night, he discovered she'd left something behind. Tucked between his books, folded small, was a piece of paper. He recognized it torn from an old letter he'd seen her burning that first week. On the blank side, she'd written in careful script, "I was worth more than a coward's silence. Thank you for helping me remember that." As he sat by the fire holding that scrap of paper until the words blurred. She'd hidden it where she knew he'd find it eventually, but not immediately. A delayed goodbye. A final gift of acknowledgement that what had passed between them had mattered. Sunday came, and with it an unexpected visitor, Reverend Carlton from the Methodist Church, thin and earnest, standing at his door with his hat in his hands. "Calder, good morning. Might I come in?" Calder let him in, though he couldn't imagine why the Reverend had ridden all this way. They weren't acquainted beyond nodding in town. "I'll come straight to the point," Carlton said, settling himself at the table. "Mrs. Paulson is concerned. She feels, that is, several of the ladies feel that you might benefit from rejoining the congregation. I haven't been to church in 7 years. Precisely why we're concerned. A man needs community. Calder, especially a man who's been through loss. And now, after recent events, well, we think it would be good for you to reconnect with proper society. Calder poured coffee, taking his time. Recent events. Carlton shifted uncomfortably. The young woman who stayed here, I'm not judging, you understand, but people talk, and without the moderating influence of church fellowship. Reverend. Calder set the pot down harder than necessary. A woman needed shelter from a storm. I provided it. If Christian charity has become something shameful, perhaps it's the church that needs examining, not me. Of course, but surely you see how it appeared. A young woman, alone, staying here for days. What would you have had me do? Turn her out into a blizzard? Perhaps bring her to town, to a proper establishment. In a blizzard, with her feet torn bloody from walking. Carlton flushed. I didn't know about that. No, you didn't, because you didn't ask. Just judged based on what things looked like from a distance. They sat in awkward silence. Finally, Carlton tried again. The invitation stands. Calder, the church doors are always open, and Mrs. Paulson mentioned there are several respectable widows who... Good day, Reverend. After Carlton left, Calder stood at his window watching the dust from his wagon settle. The man meant well, probably, but his visit had crystallized something that had been forming in Calder's mind since Susanna left. He was tired of this life. Not tired of the land or the work or even the solitude, but tired of the emptiness that masqueraded as peace. Tired of going through motions that had lost their meaning. Susanna had shown him that surviving wasn't the same as living, and now he couldn't unknow it. That evening, he sat at his table with paper and ink, writing a letter he wasn't sure he'd send. General Delivery, Sacramento, California. Miss Susanna Lee. I hope this finds you well and that you reached California safely. The cabin is as you left it, except quieter. I wanted you to know. He stopped, pen hovering. Wanted her to know what, that he missed her. That the coffee tasted bitter now when he drank it alone. That he'd kept the chair she'd sat in exactly where she'd left it, like she might walk back in and claim it. He crumpled the paper and threw it in the fire. 2 days later, Tom Garrett showed up wanting to buy one of Calder's horses. They stood in the barn while Tom examined Sadie, running his hands down her legs, checking her teeth. She's a good mare, Tom said. My wife's been wanting something gentle to ride. How much? Calder named a fair price, and Tom nodded. But as he led Sadie out, he paused. That woman ever let you know she got where she was going safe? No. Probably for the best. Clean break and all. Tom's expression turned sly. Though I heard she was a pretty little thing. Must have been hard, watching her go. Take your horse and get out. Tom! Tom left quickly, but his words lingered. Pretty little thing. Like Susanna was some trinket, some momentary temptation instead of... What had she been? Everything, a voice inside him whispered. She'd been everything. A week later, another letter came together, shorter this time. Made it to Sacramento. Found work at a boarding house cooking and cleaning. The woman who runs it is kind. She doesn't ask questions. My feet healed well, thanks to your doctoring. I hope you're eating properly. S. He'd addressed it to General Delivery in Garrison, hoping she might think to check whether she ever received it. He couldn't know, but sending it felt like maintaining a thread, thin as spider silk, between his life and hers. Spring arrived in earnest, melting the last snow and turning the world green. Calder worked his land, tended his remaining horse and cattle, went through all the motions of a life. But something had shifted fundamentally. The cabin that had been his refuge now felt like a cage. One morning, he woke to find a deer standing just outside his window, a young doe with liquid eyes. She studied him through the glass for a long moment before bounding away. It reminded him of Susanna that first night, wild and wary, poised for flight. That afternoon, he rode to town and bought the blue calico. Mrs. Henderson wrapped it in brown paper, her expression disapproving. Finally decided on it. I see. Making something for yourself. No. She waited for more, but he didn't elaborate. Let her wonder. Let them all wonder. Back home, he stored the fabric in his trunk, carefully wrapped. He didn't know what he intended to do with it. Send it to her, save it in case she came back. The gesture felt foolish, but he couldn't help himself. It was something tangible, something that connected to those few days when his cabin had felt like a home. That night, unable to sleep, he pulled out paper again. This time the words came easier. The blue calico is waiting for you. Should you ever want it, I know you won't come back. You're too proud and too careful of my reputation. But I wanted you to know it's here. You're always welcome here, whatever that's worth. C. He sealed it, addressed it to Sacramento, and tried not to think about all the things that could prevent it from reaching her. She might have moved on already, might have found better work, might have met someone who offered her more than a lonely rancher with too many ghosts. The next morning brought rain, gentle and steady. He stood on his porch watching it fall, remembering another storm and a knock at his door. The world smelled of wet earth and growing things, of spring and possibility. Somewhere out there, probably in California by now, Susanna was building a new life. He hoped it was a good one, hoped she had shoes that fit and work that didn't break her spirit and people who saw her worth. And if sometimes he stood at his window at dusk, looking west toward the mountains and beyond, that was his business. If he kept her chair exactly as she'd left it, if he sometimes made too much coffee out of habit, if he found himself listening for footsteps that never came well, a man was entitled to his foolishness. She'd given him back something he thought he'd lost forever, the ability to feel. Even if that feeling was mostly loneliness now, it was better than the numbness he'd wrapped himself in for 7 years. She'd cracked him open like spring breaks winter, and there was no going back. The rain continued, washing the world clean. But some things, Calder was learning, didn't wash away. Some things left marks that went deeper than healing, deeper than forgetting. Some things were worth keeping, even if all you could hold was the memory. Summer had settled heavy over the valley when she came back. Calder was in the barn, repairing a harness. When Buck's ears pricked forward, the horse nickered soft, the way he did when someone familiar approached. Calder looked up, squinting through the barn door into the bright afternoon sun. A figure walked up the dusty road, small, moving careful but steady. Something about the gait made his hands still on the leather. He set down his tools and stepped outside, shading his eyes. It was her. She wore a different dress, simple brown cotton, clean but travel-worn. Her hair was pinned up proper, and she carried a small carpet bag. But it was the same determined set to her shoulders, the same way of walking like she was ready to face whatever came. She stopped at the edge of his property, as if crossing that invisible line required permission. They stood looking at each other across the distance, neither moving, neither speaking. The afternoon cicadas filled the silence with their drone. Finally, she took a breath he could see even from here and walked forward. He met her halfway, stopping an arm's length apart. Up close, he could see the changes her face had filled out some, lost that desperate hollowness. Her hands, when she set down the carpet bag, showed new calluses from different work, but her eyes were the same green, holding that mix of wariness and hope he remembered. "Hello, Calder," she said softly. "Susanna." She stopped, started again. "I got your letters, all 3. He hadn't known if they'd reached her, had almost convinced himself they'd been lost or discarded. "I wasn't sure of the address. The boarding house owner saved them for me. She was good that way." She paused, studying his face like she was relearning it. "The blue calico. You really bought it?" "It's in the trunk, waiting." Something flickered across her face, pain or joy, or both mixed together. "You shouldn't have." "Probably not." They stood in the hot sun, dust motes dancing between them, neither knowing how to bridge the months of absence. Finally, she bent and picked up her bag. "I shouldn't have come. I wanted to see." She gestured helplessly at the cabin. The land, him. Sacramento was fine, good, even I had work, wages, a clean place to sleep, everything I'd wanted when I left. But, she met his eyes then, direct as ever. But I kept making coffee for two, kept turning to tell someone something and finding empty air, kept thinking about a stubborn man who needed reminding to eat regular and a cabin that felt more like home than anywhere I'd ever been. "Susanna." "Let me finish, please." She set her jaw in that way he knew. I told myself I was being foolish, that what we had, whatever it was just circumstances. Two lonely people thrown together by a storm. I dated a shopkeeper in Sacramento. Nice man, steady, respectable. He proposed last month. Calder's chest tightened. "Congratulations." I said no. She watched him carefully. Couldn't say yes when when my thoughts were here. That's when I knew I had to come back, to see if I'd imagined it all, to find out if... She faltered. "If what?" "If you'd moved on, found one of those Methodist widows, gone back to your life like I'd never interrupted it." He laughed then, short and without humor. "Look around. Susanna, does anything here look moved on to you?" She did look, taking in the unchanged cabin, the same routines evident in every detail. Her gaze lingered on the window where her chair would be visible inside. "You kept it the same. Couldn't seem to change it. Tried once to move that chair, put it back within the hour." "Oh, Calder." Her voice broke slightly. "The question is," he said carefully, "why you're really here. If Sacramento was good, if you had work and wages and proposals from respectable men, why come back?" She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I kept reading your second letter, the one where you said I was welcome here, and I realized that in all my life, no one had ever said that and meant it. Not my father after Mother died, not my husband, not anyone. Just you." "I meant it." "I know. That's what scared me." She looked down at her hands. "In Sacramento, I could build a new life, be someone without a past, but I couldn't be myself. Not fully here." She gestured at the cabin again. "Here I was, just Susanna. That was enough." "More than enough," he said roughly. She lifted her eyes to his then, and he saw tears gathering. "Is it even knowing people will talk, even knowing what they'll assume?" "Let me ask you something," he said. "That shopkeeper, the respectable one, why'd you say no?" A tear escaped, tracking down her cheek. "Because when he kissed me, I felt nothing. Because when he talked about the future, I couldn't see it. Because every time I mended his shirts, I remembered mending yours and how different it felt. How it felt like..." "Like what?" "Like coming home," she whispered. That broke something in him. He closed the distance between them, cupping her face in his work-rough hands. "Then come home. Susanna, just come home." She made a sound between a laugh and a sob. And then she was in his arms, her face pressed against his shirt like that morning months ago. But this time she wasn't running from something. This time she was running to... "I tried to stay away," she said against his chest. "I tried to be practical and sensible and think of your reputation." "To hell with my reputation." "That's what I finally realized. That you'd rather live true with gossip than false with approval." She pulled back to look up at him. "Was I right?" "You were right. Even if they whisper, even if they assume, even if they put it in the damn newspaper." That surprised a watery laugh from her. "It might come to that. The Barefoot woman returns to the hermit's cabin. Let them write what they want, long as the story ends with you staying." She reached up, touching his face like she was making sure he was real. "I brought all my savings. It's not much, but I thought maybe I could buy in, be a partner in the ranch, make it proper, businesslike, so people would understand. He kissed her then, stopping the flow of practical words. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Nothing about this is businesslike," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's not. And I don't want a business partner." "What do you want?" He thought about all the months of emptiness, all the ways her absence had hollowed out his days. "I want to wake up and know you're here. I want coffee that tastes right because I'm sharing it. I want to come in from the barn and find you humming while you work. I want—" He stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of wanting. "Yes," she said simply. "All of that, yes." They stood in the barnyard, holding each other while the sun moved toward evening. Finally, she pulled back, suddenly practical. "I need to tell you everything. About before, about my marriage and why I left with nothing, and—" "You need to tell me nothing you don't want to share. Your past is yours to reveal or keep as you choose. But if we're to build something real—" "We already did. That week in February, we built something real. The rest is just details." She studied his face. "You really mean that?" "I mean it." "Then I choose to tell you. Not today, not all at once, but over time, as we build more." She smiled then, shy but certain. "If you'll have me, if I'll have you," he shook his head in wonder. "Susanna, I've been living half a life since you left. If you're asking, will I take you back, the answer is yes. If you're asking more than that—" "I'm asking more," she said quietly. "I'm asking for all of it. The whole life, not half. I know the proper thing would be to court careful, to give people time to adjust, to pretend we're starting fresh. But I'm tired of proper. I'm tired of careful. I walked away once trying to do the right thing, and it nearly broke us both." "What are you saying?" She took a deep breath. "I'm saying that Reverend Carlton might have a wedding to perform after all. If you're willing, if you think—" "Yes," he said, not letting her finish. "Whatever you're asking, yes." "You don't know what I was going to say." "Doesn't matter. If it ends with you staying, the answer is yes." She laughed then, free and clear, the sound filling the space between barn and cabin like music. "You're supposed to be the sensible one." "Sensible would be letting you walk away again. I'm done with sensible." "Good," she said firmly. "Because I didn't come all this way to be sensible. I came to be happy, to make you happy, if you'll let me." "You already have, just by coming back." As the sun dropped lower, painting everything gold, they finally moved toward the cabin. She paused at the threshold, just as she had that first night. But this time there was no desperation in it. This time it was like she was savoring the moment of return. Inside, everything was as she'd left it. Her chair by the fire, the table she'd scrubbed, the bed she'd carefully made that last morning. But now it didn't feel empty. Now it felt like it was waiting. "Home," she said softly, testing the word. "Home," he agreed. She set down her carpetbag and moved to the stove, already reaching for the coffee pot. "You've been making it too strong again, haven't you?" "Probably." "And skipping meals when you're busy?" "Sometimes." She shook her head, but she was smiling. "Good thing I came back. Someone needs to take you in hand." "Someone does," he agreed, watching her move around his kitchen, their kitchen, like she'd never left. "Think you're up for the job?" She turned to him then, green eyes bright with promise. "I walked barefoot through a blizzard to get here the first time. Came back against all good sense the second time. What do you think?" What he thought was that miracles sometimes came on bleeding feet, that second chances were precious as spring water, and that a cabin built for one could stretch to hold two if those two were determined enough. What he said was, "I think you should look in the trunk, see if that blue calico is still to your liking." Her smile then was worth all the months of waiting, all the nights of doubt. She was here, she was staying, and maybe people would talk. maybe there would be scandal and whispers and raised eyebrows. But inside this cabin, with coffee brewing and evening falling and the woman he loved finally home, none of that mattered at all. The morning after her return, Calder woke to find Susanna in the kitchen, just as he'd imagined so many times. But reality was better. She was humming soft while she worked, that same tuneless melody he remembered, and the coffee smelled perfect. She'd found his old shirt, the one she'd mended, and put it on over her dress against the morning chill. "You're up early," he said from the doorway. She turned, smiling. "Old habits. The boarding house in Sacramento started serving breakfast at 6. I was up at 4:30 every day." She poured him coffee. "Besides, I wanted to watch the sunrise. It's different here. Bigger somehow." They drank their coffee in comfortable quiet, but Calder could see her working up to something. Finally, she set down her cup. "We should go to town today," she said. "Face it straight on. If we skulk around out here, it'll just make the talk worse." "You sure you're ready for that?" "No, but waiting won't make it easier." She lifted her chin. "Besides, we need to see Reverend Carlton." "About—" She gave him a look. "You know about what? Calder Briggs. Unless you've changed your mind since yesterday." "I haven't." "Then we need to see him. Make arrangements. Do this proper, even if how we started wasn't." "All right." He studied her determined face. "But first, you might want to change out of my shirt." She looked down, flushing slightly. "I suppose that wouldn't help our cause any." An hour later, they rode to town in the wagon, Susanna wearing her brown dress and a bonnet she'd pulled from her carpet bag. She sat straight-backed beside him, hands folded, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "We don't have to do this today," he offered. "Yes, we do. The longer we wait, the worse it'll be. Best to lance a boil quick." Romantic way to put it. That surprised a laugh from her. "I'm not feeling particularly romantic. I'm feeling like Daniel heading into the lion's den." "I'll be with you." "I know." She slipped her hand into his. "Just for a moment." "That's the only reason I can do this." Garrison appeared ahead, busy with Saturday morning trade. As they rolled down Main Street, Calder felt the moment when they were noticed. A woman sweeping her porch stopped mid-sweep. 2 men outside the barber shop turned to stare. By the time he pulled up at the church, it felt like the whole town was watching. Reverend Carlton was in his small office behind the sanctuary. He looked up when they knocked, and Calder saw him register Susanna's presence with widening eyes. "Mr. Briggs and Miss Lee, wasn't it?" "Yes, Reverend." Susanna's voice was steady. "We've come to discuss a wedding." Carlton's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "A wedding." "Our wedding," Calder clarified, in case there was any doubt. "I see." Carlton gestured for them to sit, though he looked like he needed the chair more than they did. "This is unexpected." "Not really," Susanna said. "We've known each other since February." "When you stayed at Mr. Briggs's cabin, alone, unchaperoned." "When Mr. Briggs saved my life," she corrected firmly. "When he showed Christian charity to someone in desperate need." Carlton shifted uncomfortably. "Of course, but surely you understand how it appeared." "We understand." Calder cut in. "We also don't care. We're here to arrange a wedding, not seek approval for the past. But the congregation, we'll have to accept it or not, as they choose." Susanna leaned forward. "Reverend, I know what people think. I know what they whispered when I left. And I can imagine what they'll whisper now. But here's what they don't know. Calder Briggs is the most honorable man I've ever met. He treated me with nothing but respect and kindness. And if falling in love with an honorable man is a sin, then I'll take my chances with the Lord's judgment over the towns." Carlton blinked at her directness. "Miss Lee, I'm not questioning Mr. Briggs's honor." "Aren't you?" She sat back. Then why the hesitation? We're two unmarried adults asking to be wed. Last I checked, the church generally approved of marriage. It's not that simple. It is that simple. Calder said, "Will you marry us or not?" Carlton looked between them, clearly wrestling with duty and propriety. "Finally," he sighed. "The church is available next Saturday. 2 weeks should give time for the banns to be read properly." "1 week," Susanna said. "Please, we've waited long enough." Something in her voice must have reached him. Carlton nodded slowly. 1 week, Saturday next, but I hope you're prepared for reactions." "We're prepared," Calder said, standing. "Thank you, Reverend." Outside the church, they nearly collided with Mrs. Paulson, who was clearly hurrying to investigate. Her sharp eyes took in Susanna with surprise that quickly shifted to disapproval. "Miss Lee, you've returned." "Mrs. Paulson," Susanna nodded politely. "How nice to see you again. I must say, I'm surprised. When you left so suddenly, we assumed, that is, we thought you'd found opportunity elsewhere." "I did, but I found I preferred the opportunities here." Mrs. Paulson's eyes narrowed. "Indeed, and what opportunities would those be?" Calder stepped forward. "Mrs. Paulson, since you're here, you can be the first to know. Miss Lee and I are to be married next Saturday. You're welcome to attend, of course." The woman's mouth opened and closed several times, reminding Calder of a landed fish. "Married, but you barely know each other." "We know each other well enough," Susanna said calmly. "Sometimes the heart doesn't need years to recognize what it wants." "The heart misses." Paulson's voice rose. "Young woman, do you have any idea what you're doing to this man's reputation? People have been talking since February." "Then they'll have to find something new to talk about come Saturday." Calder interrupted. "Good day, Mrs. Paulson." He took Susanna's arm and guided her toward the wagon, leaving Mrs. Paulson sputtering behind them. But their progress was slow. It seemed half the town had business on Main Street this morning, and all of it required staring at them. At the Mercantile, Mrs. Henderson was arranging a display in the window. She saw them coming and hurried outside. "Calder Briggs, is it true Mabel Paulson just ran past saying you're marrying that?" She caught herself, glancing at Susanna. "Miss Lee, you're back." "I am." Susanna smiled pleasantly. "And yes, it's true. We're to be married next Saturday." "Well," Mrs. Henderson seemed at a loss. "This is sudden." "Not really," Calder said. "I've been waiting for her to come back since the day she left." That seemed to catch Mrs. Henderson off guard. Her expression softened slightly. "You have—" "Every day," he said simply. Susanna's hand found his, squeezing tight. Mrs. Henderson noticed the gesture, and something in her face shifted. "Well then," she said slowly, "I suppose congratulations are in order. Will you be needing anything for the wedding? I've got some nice white fabric." "Actually," Susanna said, "Calder already bought fabric, blue calico. I thought I might make it up this week, if it's not too presumptuous." "He bought that months ago," Mrs. Henderson said, understanding dawning. "He's been coming in and looking at it ever since you left. I wondered—" She shook her head. "I owe you an apology. Miss Lee, both of you, I made assumptions that weren't kind or Christian." "We all make assumptions," Susanna said graciously. "What matters is what we do when we learn better." Mrs. Henderson nodded, then surprised them both by saying, "I'm a fair hand with a needle myself. If you'd like help with that dress, I'd be pleased to offer it, as a wedding gift." Susanna's eyes widened. That's very kind. Thank you." They made arrangements to meet Monday for the sewing, then continued through town. The reception was mixed. Some people turned away. Others nodded cautiously. A few offered genuine congratulations. By the time they reached the wagon, Susanna looked drained. "That was harder than I expected," she admitted as they drove out of town. "You did well, better than well." "Hey, Mrs. Henderson surprised me. I didn't expect kindness." "People can surprise you sometimes, for good and bad." She was quiet for a while, then said, "Mrs. Paulson was right about one thing. I am affecting your reputation. These are your neighbors, your community. It's not too late." "Susanna." He stopped the wagon, turning to face her fully. "Listen to me. My reputation was that of a hermit who'd given up on life, a man so lost in grief he couldn't see past his own fence posts. If being with you changes that reputation, I count it a blessing. Let them talk. Let them whisper about the barefoot woman and the foolish rancher. In 10 years, 20, when we're still here and still together, the whispers won't matter. Only the life we build will matter." Tears gathered in her eyes. "You sound very sure." "I am sure. The only question is whether you are." "I walked away from a safe life in Sacramento," she said softly. "From steady work and a respectable suitor and a clean slate. I came back to scandal and whispers and difficulty. What do you think?" "I think," he said, reaching out to wipe away a tear that had escaped, "that I'm the luckiest man in the territory." "Luck has nothing to do with it," she said. "This is choice. Deliberate, eyes-open choice. I choose you. Calder Briggs. I choose this life, this place, these people who will learn to accept us or not. I choose all of it. Even Mrs. Paulson." That surprised a laugh from her. "Even Mrs. Paulson, though I reserve the right to serve her weak tea if she visits." The tension broken. They continued home. There was work to do, a dress to make, a cabin to prepare for 2 instead of 1, a life to begin properly. The community might accept them eventually or might not, but that was tomorrow's worry. Today, they had each other and the promise of next Saturday and all the Saturdays after. Today, that was enough. That evening, as Susanna worked on cutting out her wedding dress from the blue calico, Calder watched from his chair by the fire. The domestic scene was so normal, so right, that it made his chest tight with gratitude. "What are you thinking?" she asked, glancing up from her work. "That you look right there, like you belong." She smiled, soft and sure. "That's because I do belong. It just took me a while to accept it." "And now?" "Now," she said, returning to her cutting, "I'm home, and wild horses couldn't drag me away again." Outside, night settled over the valley. Inside, lamplight painted everything golden, and the small sounds of shared living filled the cabin fabric rustling, fire crackling, 2 people breathing in comfortable rhythm. It was more than Calder had dared hope for when he'd bought that blue fabric months ago. Sometimes, he thought, the best things in life came to those who waited, but sometimes they came to those brave enough to return. Saturday came wrapped in golden light, one of those perfect autumn days that made the mountains stand sharp against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Calder stood in his best shirt, the one Susanna had mended with special care, watching through the window as she pinned up her hair. She wore the blue calico dress, finished just yesterday with Mrs. Henderson's help. It fit her perfect, bringing out the green of her eyes and the warm tone of her skin, but it was the expression on her face that held him peaceful, settled, sure. "You keep staring like that. We'll be late to our own wedding," she said, catching his eye in the small mirror he'd hung for her. "Let them wait. I've been waiting longer." She turned to him then, smoothing down the blue fabric. "How do I look?" "Like everything I never knew I was waiting for." Her smile trembled at the edges. "Calder Briggs, when did you become a poet?" "Must be your influence." They decided to walk to town, taking their time on this last journey as unmarried folks. The morning air was crisp. carrying the scent of changing leaves and distant snow on the mountains. Susanna had worried about her dress getting dusty, but Calder had seen the relief in her eyes when he suggested walking. Too many memories of that first desperate journey. Maybe this walk would replace those memories with better ones. "Are you nervous?" she asked as they crested the hill above town. "No, you—" "Yes," she laughed at herself. "Isn't that silly I faced down Mrs. Paulson and half the town? But now that it's here, I'm shaking like a leaf." "Why?" She was quiet a moment. Then, "Because it matters. Because this time I'm choosing right, and I know it, and I want everything to be perfect." "It already is. You're here. That's all the perfect I need." They could see the church ahead, and a surprising number of wagons and horses outside. Susanna's hand tightened on his arm. "That's a lot of people for a scandal wedding." Maybe they came to see the show. Maybe, but she lifted her chin in that way he loved. "Well, let's give them one." The church was indeed fuller than Calder had seen it in years. As they entered, heads turned and whispers started. But then Mrs. Henderson stood up in her pew. "Don't you look beautiful, dear?" she said clearly, and the whispers shifted tone. Others followed her lead, the blacksmith nodding approval, the baker's wife smiling. Even some folks Calder barely knew offering quiet congratulations. Not everyone, of course. Mrs. Paulson sat rigid in her usual spot, mouth pursed like she'd bitten something sour. A few others looked away, but more welcomed than rejected, and that was better than either of them had hoped. Reverend Carlton waited at the altar, looking relieved at the general acceptance. As Calder and Susanna made their way forward, she whispered, "Look at Buck through the window." Calder glanced over to see his horse had wandered to the church window, peering in like he wanted to witness the proceedings. Trust Susanna to notice something like that on her wedding day. They stood before the altar, hands clasped, while Carlton began the familiar words. But Calder barely heard them. He was too caught up in the woman beside him, this brave, stubborn, beautiful soul who'd walked into his life on bleeding feet and changed everything. "The rings," Carlton prompted, and Calder fumbled for the simple gold band he'd bought. Nothing fancy, they weren't fancy people, but solid and true. Like them. Susanna had tears in her eyes as he slipped it on her finger. "With this ring," he said, voice rougher than intended, "I thee wed." She'd managed to buy him a ring too, though he hadn't expected it. "You sold something," he said quietly as she put it on him. "What?" "Nothing I'll miss," she whispered back. "Nothing that matters more than this." "I now pronounce you man and wife," Carlton said, looking genuinely pleased. "You may kiss your bride." Calder had kissed her before, but not like this, not with the whole town watching, not with the blessing of church and law, not with the knowledge that she was his and he was hers for all the days to come. When they parted, the church erupted in applause, led enthusiastically by Mrs. Henderson. Even Mrs. Paulson clapped, though she looked pained doing it. The reception was in the churchyard, simple fare that various townswomen had contributed. Calder suspected Mrs. Henderson had organized it, bullied or shamed others into participating. Whatever the reason, there were tables of food and genuine well-wishes from more people than he'd expected. "It's like they were just waiting for permission to be decent," Susanna murmured, accepting congratulations from the banker's wife. "Sometimes people need an excuse to choose kindness over gossip," Calder replied. Tom Garrett approached, looking sheepish. "Calder, Mrs. Briggs." He tested out the title, then nodded. "I owe you both an apology. Said some things that weren't kind or called for." "Water under the bridge, Tom," Calder said, surprising himself by meaning it. "That's generous. More than I deserve." Tom shifted his weight. "My Sarah sent this along." He handed Susanna a small wrapped package. Said every new bride needs something impractical. Susanna unwrapped it to find a delicate lace handkerchief. obviously costly. "It's beautiful. Please thank her for me." As Tom walked away, Susanna touched the lace gently. "6 months ago, I owned nothing but what I stood in. Now look." "Regrets?" Calder asked. "Never. Not one." As afternoon wore on, the crowd thinned. Finally, it was just them and a few stalwarts helping clean up. Mrs. Henderson pressed a basket into Susanna's hands. "Supper and breakfast," she said. "Figured you wouldn't want to cook tonight." "You've been so kind," Susanna said. "After everything, I didn't expect—" "We all make mistakes. Dear, what matters is learning from them." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "Besides, anyone can see how he looks at you. That kind of love doesn't come along often. Be a fool not to celebrate it." They walked home as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Susanna had taken off her shoes, carrying them in one hand, her other hand in Calder's. "Full circle," she said, glancing down at her bare feet. "Though under better circumstances. Your feet aren't bleeding this time." "No, and I'm walking towards something instead of away." She stopped, turning to face him. "Calder, I need you to know something. This morning, when I was getting ready, I found the note I left you, the one I hid in your books, about being worth more than silence. Yes, I almost threw it away. It felt like it belonged to another person, another life. But then I realized I should keep it, to remember." "Remember what?" "That you saw my worth when I couldn't, that you gave me space to heal and courage to choose better." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you for 1,000 reasons, but that might be the biggest. You helped me remember who I was underneath all the hurt." "You did the same for me," he said quietly. "Showed me I was more than just my grief, that there was life after loss." "Look at us," she said, half laughing, half crying. "A couple of broken people who somehow make each other whole." "Nothing broken about us now." They reached the cabin as full dark fell. Calder paused at the door, then swept her up in his arms. She gasped, then laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Tradition," he said, carrying her over the threshold. "I didn't know you were traditional." "I'm not, but some traditions are worth keeping." Inside, she'd transformed the space over the past week. New curtains at the windows, a bright rag rug by the hearth, small touches that made it feel like a real home instead of just shelter. Their home now. He set her down gently, and they stood in their kitchen just looking at each other. Man and wife. After all the pain and distance and difficulty, they'd found their way here. "No regrets?" he asked again, needing to be sure. "None, not ever." She reached up to touch his face. "This is where I belong, where we belong, together." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows just like that night in February. But inside was warmth and light and love, a cabin no longer empty, but filled with promise. Calder drew his wife close, thinking of all the nights he'd stood at this window looking west, wondering where she was. Now he knew she was right where she should be. Home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Briggs," he said softly. "Been home since the day I came back," she replied. "Just took till today to make it official." They stood together in their small cabin, two people who'd walked long roads alone before finding each other. Outside, the vast wilderness stretched endless under the stars. But inside, in this circle of lamplight and love, they had everything they needed. The cabin that had been built for one had stretched to hold two, just as their hearts had stretched to hold a love neither had expected to find again. And in that stretching, that growing, that choosing each other despite everything, that was where the real story lived. Not in the whispers or the scandal or the barefoot woman in the storm, but in the quiet courage of two people brave enough to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. The fire crackled in the hearth, sending shadows dancing on the walls. But they weren't the lonely shadows of before. Now they were the shadows of a life being lived fully, of a love chosen freely, of a future stretching bright and possible before them. And somewhere in the barn, Buck nickered softly, as if giving his blessing too. After all, he'd been there from the beginning, that snowy February night when everything changed. Now he was witness to the ending that was really a beginning, the start of Calder and Susanna Briggs's life together. It had taken storms and distance and courage to get here, but standing in their cabin, holding each other close, they knew every step had been worth it. They were home. They were whole. They were together. And that was enough. More than enough. That was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Calder and Susanna's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world these frontier tales are reaching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover these tales of love, courage, and redemption in the American frontier. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more stories with you soon.